Pull this weed out of the ground, dry it, and an herb supplier will pay you around $40 a pound for it. Try to sell it as something to eat, and you are breaking the law. The FDA pulled it in 2001. Britain, Canada, Germany, and Australia banned it outright. And yet, in the Amish farm country of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there are gardens where this exact plant has grown in the same corner for generations, on purpose, prized. They are not selling it, and they are not eating it. They are feeding it to their soil. It is called comfrey. Now, your first thought is probably the same one most people have. A weed that feeds a garden. Sounds like the kind of thing somebody makes up to sell you a course. So let us be straight with you right at the top. This plant does two things, and both of them are real. The first one you can put to work in your own garden this week. The second one is the reason it is worth $40 a pound, and the reason the government finally pulled it off the shelf. Most videos about this plant only ever tell you the first thing. By the end of this one, you will understand both, and you will see exactly why the families in Lancaster County quietly stepped off the fertilizer treadmill the rest of us are still on. Here's the first thing, and it costs you nothing. Comfrey sends a single thick root straight down past 6 feet into the kind of deep subsoil your tomatoes and carrots will never reach. Down there, it finds the one mineral that decides whether a plant wastes itself on leaves or finally sets heavy ripe fruit. It pulls that mineral up into its big leaves, and all an Amish gardener has to do is cut those leaves and lay them on the ground. That is free tomato food. The most expensive thing in any bottle on the shelf, hauled up out of dirt nobody else can touch. We will show you 5 different ways to use it before this is over, but that is only half of what makes this plant so strange. The other half is a story that starts with a failed batch of postage stamp glue, runs through the palace of a Russian empress, and ends with a warning label from the FDA. To understand how a common weed ended up worth more than the bottle it replaces, we have to go back to the 1870s. There was a Quaker smallholder in the English county of Essex named Henry Doubleday. Doubleday was not chasing a miracle plant. He was chasing glue. He made his living from gum arabic, the sticky stuff tapped from acacia trees, and the supply kept failing on him. So he went looking for something he could grow at home that would do the same job. And in an old farming journal, he read about a Russian plant with thick, slippery, gluey roots. He thought it might just make the perfect glue for the back of a postage stamp. To get it, he wrote a letter to the head gardener at the Royal Palace in St. Petersburg, Russia. And here is a detail you could not make up. Catherine the Great had decreed years before that the palace gardeners should always be English or Scottish. So the man who opened Doubleday's letter could read it, and he mailed back a handful of seedlings. What Doubleday did not know was that those seedlings were an accident. The palace gardener had planted a blue-flowered comfrey from the Caucasus Mountains right next to a common cream-colored comfrey, and the two had crossed in the flower bed. The seeds were hybrids, and like a lot of hybrids, they grew with a wild runaway vigor that neither parent had on its own. What happened next is the part that still does not quite make sense. The stamp glue never worked. Doubleday had chased the wrong thing entirely, but in failing, he had stumbled onto one of the most productive plants a small farm could ever grow. And instead of cashing in, he spent the next 30 years of his life giving it away, because he had lived through the hungry years and believed this plant could help feed poor families. That tells you the kind of man he was. By family tradition, Doubleday's own people had sailed to Pennsylvania with William Penn generations before, the same Penn whose colony became home to the Amish and the Quakers of Lancaster County. So the thread you are following runs straight from a failed glue experiment through a Russian flower bed to the American farm country where these gardeners grow it today. For about 60 years after Doubleday died, comfrey mostly sat quiet. Then, in the 1950s, a man named Lawrence Hills picked up where he left off. Hills was a horticulturist, and he became, by every account, the world authority on this one plant. In 1954, he founded a research organization and named it the Henry Doubleday Research Association in honor of the old Quaker. A few years later, he rented a 3/4-acre plot in a village called Bocking for the grand sum of £10 a year and did something nobody had bothered to do before. He gathered comfrey strains from farms all over Britain and tested them side by side for 5 solid years. He borrowed his labeling system from the way fruit tree growers numbered their rootstocks, careful and plain. He ended up with about 30 distinct varieties numbered one after another, Bocking 1, Bocking 2, on down the line. And one of them stood head and shoulders above the rest, Bocking number 14. Hold on to that number because it is the single most important thing to get right when you grow this plant. We will come back to it. First, you deserve to understand why it works at all. Most of your vegetables feed in just the top foot of soil. And that is the part the fertilizer companies count on you never thinking about. That is where their roots live, and that is where they fight each other for whatever is there. Comfrey does not play that game. That thick taproot drives down past 6 feet into subsoil ordinary roots cannot reach, where minerals have been washing down and collecting for years. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, The comfrey pulls them up, packs them into its leaves, and grows so fast you can cut it to the ground 3 or 4 times in a single summer. Think about what that means for a moment. Every bag of fertilizer you have ever bought was your attempt to replace minerals in the top foot of soil. Comfrey is a plant that mines the minerals sitting 6 feet below your garden, out of reach of every other thing you grow, and carries them up to the surface on its own. It does not need you to dig. It does not need you to buy. It just grows, and every time you cut it, it hands you a pile of leaves packed with the exact nutrition your tomatoes are begging for. A plant that does this automatically, for free, year after year once you put it in the ground, is not a weed. It is the most productive thing in the garden. Now you will hear comfrey called a dynamic accumulator, and we want to be straight with you because there is a lot of nonsense online about this plant. Some of the wilder claims do not hold up. When you actually test comfrey leaf, its overall numbers are not magic. But one number is genuinely remarkable, and it is the one that matters for a vegetable garden. Comfrey leaf cut when the plant is in flower runs about 5% potassium. That is more potassium than farmyard manure, by some measures 2 to 3 times more. And potassium is the exact nutrient that tells a tomato, a pepper, or a potato to stop making leaves and start setting heavy, ripe fruit. Most bagged fertilizers lean hard on nitrogen, which is fine for growing big, bushy green plants. But pour too much of that on your tomatoes, and you get a tall, leafy thing with almost nothing to pick. Comfrey leans the other way, toward the potassium that flips a plant over into flowering and fruiting and setting the heavy crop you planted it for. That is the difference between a handsome plant and a full basket. So when an Amish gardener cuts an armful of comfrey and works it in around the tomatoes, that is not folklore. That is a free homegrown dose of the most expensive thing in a bottle of tomato food, mined out of subsoil nobody else can reach. The plant did the digging. All they did was cut the leaves. That $40 price tag comes from comfrey's second life. Its old country name is knitbone. The Latin name symphytum means to grow together. For thousands of years, going back to the Greek physician Dioscorides and the medieval abbess Hildegard, people mashed the leaves and root into a paste and bound it over sprains, bruises, and broken bones. Soldiers carried it into battle, and it was not pure superstition. When you go to plant your seed potatoes in spring, before you cover them over, lay a thick line of fresh comfrey leaves right in the bottom of the trench underneath the potatoes. As the potatoes grow through the season, those leaves break down directly beneath the roots and release their potassium exactly when and where the tubers need it most, while they are swelling underground. Potatoes are hungry for potassium more than almost anything else you grow, and this puts the feed right at their feet. People who try this for the first time are genuinely shocked at the size of what they dig up in the fall. No bag of fertilizer, just a handful of leaves off a plant that grows back every time you cut it. That is the whole system. 5 uses, 1 plant, and not $1 spent after the first crowns go into the ground. We will tell you, we were skeptical too. We planted 2 crowns of Bocking 14 in a back corner 3 springs ago, expecting to babysit them. That first summer, honestly, not much happened. The plants settled in quietly and looked completely ordinary. But the second year, they came roaring up and we started cutting. We have not bought a single bottle of tomato feed since, and we will not. We just stood there in the dirt because the answer had been sitting in that corner the whole time, free, asking for nothing. Here is what to do. Get yourself 2 or 3 crowns of Bocking 14, never the seeding kind, and plant them somewhere out of the way this season. Give them a year to root down. Then start cutting and use those leaves every way we showed you. As a liquid feed for your tomatoes, as a chop and drop mulch around your beds, as a fire starter for your compost, and buried under your potatoes in spring. The lawn and garden companies sell you the idea that good soil comes in a bag, that you buy it new every spring, that without them your garden falls apart. The Amish never believed that. They watched one stubborn plant pull treasure out of the deep earth and hand it over for the cost of a little patience. They did not fight their soil, they fed it with something that fed itself. One weed the chemical companies genuinely hope you never grow, quietly doing the job of everything on their shelf for free, forever. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.